4 days after 5-year-old Emma Hartley vanished from her backyard, officers Maria Santos and Jake Morrison began noticing a golden retriever stationed purposefully by the black iron fence at the edge of the search perimeter, as if trying to communicate something urgent. It wasn't aggressive, it simply waited, tail still, eyes fixed on them with a strange intelligence that made their exhaustion feel suddenly irrelevant. The dog waited until it had their attention, then barked 3 times, sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore, before turning toward the fence line and pausing to look back, as if expecting them to follow. Desperate for answers and running out of time before the FBI took over the case, they did. The golden retriever led them beyond protocol, beyond the mapped boundaries of Meadowbrook, into a hidden world beneath their feet, an uncharted network of forgotten storm drains. They thought they were chasing a last fragile chance to find the missing child alive. But what they found wasn't just Emma. It was a truth buried for decades, waiting in the darkness. The gray morning light filtered through the Meadowbrook Police Department windows, casting pale shadows across the incident room. Maria Santos reviewed the case file for what felt like the 100th time, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. Jake Morrison leaned against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, his voice hoarse from calling Emma's name through megaphones for 4 straight days. "They're handing it over to the feds tomorrow," he said quietly, ending the call. His shoulders sagged with defeat. Maria looked up sharply. "We still have time." "For what? We've searched every inch of this neighborhood, twice." Jake's frustration bled through his exhaustion. "The canine units lost her scent at the property line. The forensics team found nothing. The neighbors saw nothing. It's like she just disappeared." Emma had been playing in her backyard during her 5th birthday party. 20 children, a dozen adults, balloons tied to the fence posts, and a pink frosted cake waiting in the kitchen. In the 7 minutes it took Emma's mother to bring out the candles and gather everyone for the song, the little girl had slipped through the garden gate and vanished, leaving only small sneaker prints in the mud and an abandoned jump rope coiled near the fence. Search teams had combed every street, every park, every abandoned building within 5 miles. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers with Emma's smiling face. The local news ran her photo every hour. But Meadowbrook, a quiet suburb where children rode bikes unsupervised and neighbors left their doors unlocked, had never seen anything like this. The community's sense of safety had shattered, replaced by a collective holding of breath. In the Hartley home, 3 blocks away, Emma's mother sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched birthday cake still on the counter. Her father paced the driveway in the pre-dawn darkness, refusing to sleep, refusing to accept that his daughter might not come home. A sharp, insistent bark cut through the morning silence. Maria's head snapped up. Through the window, she could see the golden retriever sitting perfectly still on the sidewalk outside, barely 20 feet from where they'd established the command post. Its gaze was locked on the building, on them, with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "That's the 3rd time this week," Jake said, moving to the window. "Same dog, same spot. Canine control can't catch it. It keeps showing up at the fence line, then disappearing before anyone can get close." The dog barked again, 3 deliberate, urgent barks that seemed to echo in the still morning air. Then it stood, trotted purposefully toward the black iron fence at the edge of the Hartley property, looked back directly at the officers, and sat down, waiting. It wasn't normal behavior. Both officers felt it, the strange, almost human purpose radiating from the animal's posture and gaze. "Maria," Jake said slowly, "what if it's trying to tell us something?" She wanted to dismiss it. Everything in her training told her to stick to evidence, to procedure, to the systematic grid search they'd already completed. But something in the dog's unwavering stare made her pause. In 4 days of searching, they'd found nothing. Every lead had gone cold. Every avenue had reached a dead end. The next morning, the golden retriever returned at dawn. Maria had her phone ready this time, recording as it barked at the same spot on the fence line, then walked several paces toward a section of overgrown bushes, pausing to look back at them with those impossibly knowing eyes. "We should follow it," Maria heard herself say, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Jake hesitated, glancing at the case files spread across the table, at the maps marked with completed search sectors, at all the proper procedure they'd followed that had led nowhere. "Maria, if anyone finds out we abandoned protocol to follow a stray dog—" "Emma is still out there," Maria interrupted, her voice firm. "I know she is, and that dog knows something we don't." They stepped outside in the cold dawn air, their breath forming clouds in the morning chill. The golden retriever's tail wagged once, not playfully, but deliberately, as if acknowledging their decision. Then it turned and moved along the fence line, pausing frequently to ensure they were still following, its focus absolute and unwavering. The dog led them to a section of the fence Maria had walked past a dozen times, but now, watching the animal paw at a particular spot where the iron posts met overgrown honeycomb, she noticed something she'd missed before. A gap in the vegetation, barely visible, where the ground seemed to slope downward. The retriever squeezed through the gap and disappeared. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came a bark from somewhere below ground level, muffled, distant, echoing. Jake pulled back the branches and froze. "Maria, there's a drainage grate here. It's been forced open." Maria knelt beside him, her heart suddenly pounding. The grate was old, its metal corroded, and someone or something had pried it partially open, wide enough for a small child, wide enough for a dog. Below, in the darkness, the golden retriever barked again, 3 times, urgent, insistent, waiting for them to understand what every fiber of its being was trying to communicate. Emma was down there. Somewhere in the forgotten infrastructure beneath Meadowbrook's peaceful streets, a little girl was waiting to be found, and somehow, impossibly, this dog knew exactly where she was. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the UK, so let me know where you're listening from. Let's begin.
The balloons had been Emma's favorite part. Pink and silver, tied to every fence post in the Hartley backyard, bobbing in the afternoon breeze like tiny clouds. She'd clapped her hands when her father finished the last one, her gap-toothed smile wide with 5-year-old delight. 20 children ran through the grass, their laughter rising above the hum of adult conversation drifting from the kitchen, where parents gathered around coffee and small talk about soccer schedules in the upcoming school year. Jennifer Hartley had checked the cake 3 times, making sure the frosting was perfect, the candles straight. Pink roses piped along the edges, Emma's name in careful cursive across the top. She'd spent 2 hours on it the night before, wanting everything to be special. When she finally carried it to the counter, gathering matches and the camera, her sister Karen was refilling coffee mugs and making jokes about surviving another year of parenthood. "Ready?" Jennifer called through the window. The children were playing tag near the swing set, a blur of bright colors and motion. She counted heads automatically, a habit from years of managing playdates. 20, all that counted for. It took 7 minutes to light the candles, arrange them just right, and gather everyone for the song. 7 minutes of ordinary time that would later feel like a knife twisting in her chest. When Jennifer stepped onto the patio with the cake, the singing started immediately. Parents pulled out phones to record. Children clustered around the picnic table, jostling for the best view. But Emma wasn't among them. "Emma?" Jennifer's voice carried across the yard, still light, not yet touched by panic. "Emma, sweetie, it's time for cake." The yard was suddenly too quiet. Karen checked behind the playhouse. Another mother looked under the trampoline. Michael Hartley walked the perimeter, calling his daughter's name with growing urgency. The back gate stood open, swinging slightly on its hinges, the latch Jennifer was certain she'd secured now hanging loose. Someone called 911 at 3:47 p.m. Officers Morrison and Santos arrived 12 minutes later, their patrol car pulling into the driveway as parents were already organizing into search groups. Jake Morrison took statements while Maria Santos examined the gate, the mud beyond it, the small sneaker prints that led toward the fence line, and then simply stopped, as if Emma had been lifted away. The canine unit arrived within the hour. German shepherds with focused eyes and tight leads, trained noses pressed to Emma's bedroom carpet, her favorite stuffed rabbit, the pink jacket she'd worn that morning. The dogs pulled their handlers through the gate, across the neighbor's property, following an invisible trail to the edge of Maple Street, where the scent went cold at the storm drain on the corner. The handlers tried twice more, circling back, starting fresh. Nothing. By nightfall, the search had expanded to a 6-block radius. Volunteers knocked on every door, officers checked abandoned buildings, construction sites, anywhere a child might wander or hide. News crews set up lights in the Hartley driveway. Emma's school photo appeared on television screens across 3 counties. Dark curls, bright eyes, a gap where her front tooth used to be. 48 hours passed in a blur of false leads and crushing disappointments. A neighbor thought they'd seen a girl matching Emma's description near the park. It was someone else's daughter. A security camera caught movement near the elementary school. It was a raccoon. Each dead end felt like losing Emma all over again. Maria Santos barely slept those first 2 nights. She walked the search grid at 2 a.m. with her flashlight, looking for something everyone else had missed. Jake Morrison interviewed the same witnesses 3 times, hoping someone would remember a detail, however small. But Meadowbrook kept its silence, and somewhere in that silence, Emma Hartley remained lost. Maria's eyes burned as she stared at the incident board for what felt like the 1,000th time. Day 3. 72 hours since Emma Hartley had slipped through that gate and disappeared into thin air. The board was covered in photos, maps, timelines, a visual representation of everything they knew, which amounted to almost nothing. She traced the search grid with her finger, each marked sector representing hours of volunteers combing through yards, woods, drainage ditches, all empty. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago. She drank it anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. Across the incident room, Jake hunched over his desk, phone pressed to his ear, working through the neighbor list again, 3rd time this week. His voice had taken on a pleading quality that made Maria's chest tight. "I understand you already spoke with us, Mrs. Chen, but sometimes people remember details after a few days, anything at all, even if it seems insignificant." He paused, listening, then thanked her quietly before hanging up. His hand lingered on the receiver as if he might pick it up immediately again and start over. "Nothing?" Maria asked. She already knew the answer. Jake shook his head. "Same as yesterday, same as the day before. Nobody saw anything, nobody heard anything. 20 kids in that yard, and Emma just vanished." The door opened and Captain Williams entered, his face carrying the weight of bad news. "The FBI's sending a team. They'll be here tomorrow morning to take over the investigation." Maria felt something crack inside her chest. Tomorrow meant they'd failed. Tomorrow meant Emma's case would become a statistic, a file number, another missing child poster stapled to telephone poles until the rain washed the ink away. "We still have time," she said, but the words felt hollow. Williams looked at her with tired eyes. "You've done everything right, Santos, both of you. Sometimes that's not enough." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him with terrible finality. At the Hartley home, the vigil had grown quieter. Fewer visitors now, fewer casseroles arriving at the door. People were running out of things to say, out of hope to offer. Jennifer sat in Emma's bedroom, holding the stuffed rabbit the canine unit had used for scent tracking. She hadn't changed clothes in 2 days. Michael stood at the back gate, the one he'd secured now after closing it 100 times since Saturday, testing the latch over and over as if he could somehow undo what had already happened.
The news had stopped calling it a search and started calling it an investigation. The shift in language felt like a door closing, like the world had already decided Emma was gone and they were just going through the motions now. The volunteers who'd shown up in droves those first 2 days had dwindled to a handful. Even they moved through the remaining sectors with less urgency, their calls of Emma's name sounding more like ritual than hope.
Back at the station, Maria pulled Emma's school photo from the file and pinned it to the center of her board. Dark curls, bright eyes, that gap-toothed smile. 5 years old. Somewhere out there, if she was still out there, she was cold and scared and waiting for someone to find her. "We're missing something," Maria said quietly. "We have to be missing something." Jake looked up from his desk, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We've checked everything twice, 3 times. What else is there?" Maria didn't have an answer. She turned back to the board, to the maps and timelines and dead ends, searching for the one thread they hadn't pulled, the one question they hadn't asked. But the evidence stared back at her, silent and unforgiving, offering nothing new. Outside, darkness fell over Meadowbrook for the 4th night in a row, and somewhere in that darkness, Emma Hartley remained lost. The golden retriever appeared again at dawn on day 4, materializing from the morning mist like something out of a dream. Maria spotted it from the incident room window. Same dog, same spot by the black iron fence, sitting with perfect stillness, as if it had been waiting all night for someone to notice. She grabbed her jacket and headed outside, Jake following close behind. The dog watched them approach, its amber eyes tracking their movement with unsettling focus. When they were 20 feet away, it stood and barked. 3 times, sharp, deliberate sounds that echoed down the empty street. Then it turned, trotted to a specific section of the fence line, and sat down again, looking back at them expectantly. "That's the 4th time this week," Jake said quietly. "Same exact spot, same 3 barks." Maria pulled out her phone and started recording. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing itself to be filmed, then repeated the pattern. 3 barks, walk to the fence, pause, return. Like a loop it needed them to understand. "Animals don't behave like this," Maria said, watching the footage play back. "This is purposeful, deliberate." "You think it knows something about Emma?" Maria didn't answer. She couldn't explain the certainty settling in her chest, the feeling that this animal was trying to communicate something urgent, something they'd been too blind or too rational to see. Instead, she walked to the fence line where the dog kept returning. The retriever followed her, sat beside a particular post where the iron met overgrown honeysuckle, and barked once more. Maria knelt, examining the area. The fence was old, the posts showing rust and wear. Beyond it, wild vegetation had reclaimed what looked like abandoned property. She pulled out her phone again, this time opening the county property records database. Back at the station, she spread out a map of the neighborhood alongside the digital records. The fence line marked a boundary between the Hartley property and a plot that had changed hands multiple times over the decades. But the original owner, listed from 1965 to 2023, made her breath catch. Robert Hartley. "Jake, look at this." She turned her laptop screen toward him. "The property on the other side of that fence, where the jog keeps going, it belonged to someone named Robert Hartley, died 2 years ago." Jake leaned in, scanning the records. "Related to the family?" "It has to be. Hartley's not that common a name in Meadowbrook." Maria clicked through more documents, finding a death certificate and a estate notice. Robert Hartley, age 78, former city engineer, no surviving children. Property went to the county after his death, never developed. "City engineer," Jake repeated slowly. "That means he would have known the infrastructure, storm drains, utility tunnels. All the places we couldn't search because they're not on the modern maps." Maria felt something shift in her chest, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed, suddenly sliding into place. The SRS United lost Emma's scent at the storm drain on Maple Street. What if she didn't go across the street? What if she went down? The golden retriever was back the next morning, waiting in the same spot, as if it had known they would need time to understand.
Maria brought a printed copy of Robert Hartley's old city plans, documents she'd requested from the municipal archives overnight. The dog watched as she and Jake approached, its tail giving a single deliberate wag. "You know where she is, don't you?" Maria said quietly, more to herself than the animal. The retriever barked 3 times, then moved to the fence line and waited, its body tense with purpose, its gaze fixed on the overgrown property beyond. Not random behavior, not coincidence, an invitation they'd been too rational, too bound by procedure, too afraid to accept. Until now. Maria looked at Jake. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. They were out of time, out of leads, out of every conventional option. The FBI would arrive in hours and take the case away from them, and Emma would become another statistic. "We follow him," Maria said, "whatever it takes." The golden retriever's ears perked forward, as if it had been waiting 4 days to hear exactly those words.
The woman who answered the door at 47 Birch Lane had Robert Hartley's eyes, the same gray-blue that stared out from the property records photo Maria had pulled. Margaret Hartley, 76, widowed, looked at the police badge with weary recognition, as if she'd been expecting this visit eventually. "You're here about Emma," she said quietly, not a question. Maria felt her pulse quicken. "You know about the case?" "Everyone knows. Small town." Margaret stepped aside, gesturing them into a living room that smelled of lavender and old books. "But I didn't connect it until I saw the news last night. The parents, Michael and Jennifer Hartley. Michael is my stepson, Robert's son from his first marriage. We weren't close." Jake pulled out his notebook. "So Robert Hartley was Emma's grandfather?" "Yes, though he never met her. There was a falling out years ago. Family politics, old wounds that never healed. Michael and Robert didn't speak for the last decade of his life." Margaret settled into a worn armchair, her hands folded in her lap. "Robert died 2 years ago, heart failure. I kept the house for a while, couldn't bear to sell it. Eventually I moved here, smaller, easier. The old place just sits empty now." Maria sat forward, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Hartley, your husband was a city engineer. Did he work on the storm drain systems in this area?" Something shifted in Margaret's expression. "He designed most of them, back in the 60s and 70s when Meadowbrook was expanding. Robert always said the old infrastructure was his legacy, that he'd built it to last centuries." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "In his final days, he kept talking about the drains, said people had forgotten them, that the new city plans didn't account for the old network. He was worried someone would get hurt." "Did he leave any documentation? Original plans, maps, anything that might show?" "There's a box," Margaret interrupted, already rising from her chair. "I couldn't bring myself to throw out his work papers. They're in the garage. I'll get them." She returned minutes later carrying a weathered cardboard box, its corners reinforced with yellowed tape. Inside, Maria found rolled blueprints, hand-drawn schematics on translucent paper, spiral notebooks filled with engineering calculations and notes in cramped handwriting. The maps were remarkable, intricate networks of tunnels and drains spreading beneath Meadowbrook like veins beneath skin, dated 1964, 1967, 1971. "He drew these himself," she said softly, "before everything was computerized. Robert believed in understanding every inch of what he built. He used to walk the tunnels himself, checking for weaknesses, making sure everything held." Jake unrolled one of the larger maps, spreading it across the coffee table. "Mrs. Hartley, do you recognize this area?" He pointed to a section marked with careful crosshatching. Margaret leaned closer, then nodded slowly. "That's the old property, our first house where Robert and I lived before we moved. The fence line is right there." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she traced the lines on the map. A major drainage junction sat directly beneath Robert Hartley's former property, connecting to smaller tributaries that ran under the neighboring lots.
under the Handley family's current backyard, under the exact spot where Emma had disappeared. "There's an access point," Maria breathed, finding the notation on the blueprint, "right at the fence line. It's not on any modern city maps." They sealed most of the old system in the 80s. New regulations, new designs. But Robert always said they didn't seal everything. Too expensive, too complex. So they did what bureaucracies do. They covered the access points, updated the maps to show only the new system, and pretended the old one didn't exist. Maria's voice carried an edge of frustration, which means there's an entire labyrinth under this neighborhood that no one knows about. No one except Robert Hartley. She pulled out the most detailed schematic, dated 1967, showing the area around the Hartley properties. The main junction sat directly beneath Robert's old house, with tributaries branching out like tree roots. One line ran directly under the current Hartley backyard, connecting to a smaller access shaft marked with careful precision at the fence line. The exact spot where the golden retriever kept barking.
Here, Maria tapped the notation. Maintenance access, installed 1965. Robert marked it with double lines, which means it was a primary inspection point, large enough for a person to enter. Jake leaned closer, studying the cross-section drawings. And if the grate was forced open or damaged, a child could fall in. Or climb in thinking it was an adventure. Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Emma disappears during her birthday party. The canine units lose her scent at the storm drain on Maple Street, which according to this map connects to the same network. She could have wandered into the new system and somehow found her way into the old one. How long could someone survive down there? Depends on injuries, access to water. The tunnels would have groundwater, maybe enough to drink if she was desperate. Maria didn't want to think about the other possibilities. The darkness, the cold, the fear of a 5-year-old trapped alone underground for 4 days. Jake straightened, his jaw set with determination. "We need to report this to Captain Williams, get a full search team, proper equipment, and lose another 6 hours while they organize, brief the FBI, argue about jurisdiction and liability." Maria met his eyes. "The dog is there right now, Jake, waiting at that exact spot. If Emma's down there, if she's still alive, we don't have 6 hours. Maria, if we go down there without authorization, without backup, we'll be violating protocol. I know, we could lose our badges." She gathered the maps, rolling them carefully. "But that dog has been trying to tell us something for 4 days. Robert Hartley spent his final days worried about those tunnels. His dog knew them. His granddaughter is missing. Everything is pointing to the same place." Jake was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Outside, dawn was breaking over Meadowbrook, the 5th morning since Emma had disappeared. In a few hours, the FBI would arrive and take over the investigation. This was their last chance to act on what every instinct was screaming at them. "We'll need rope," Jake said finally. "Flashlights, first aid kit, even if it probably won't work underground. And we mark our path so we can find our way back." Maria felt relief and fear flood through her in equal measure. "We tell no one until we know something. If we're wrong, if there's nothing down there." "We're not wrong." Jake grabbed his jacket from the chair. "That dog knows. I don't understand how, but it knows." They gathered supplies quickly, efficiently, moving with the practiced coordination of partners who'd worked together for 3 years. Rope, chalk for marking walls, industrial flashlights, water bottles, the first aid kit from the patrol car. Maria tucked Robert's maps into a waterproof evidence bag, the blueprints that might be the only guide through the forgotten tunnels below. As they drove toward the Hartley property, the sun rising behind them cast long shadows across the empty streets. Maria's phone buzzed with a message from Captain Williams asking for an update. She silenced it. The golden retriever was waiting at the fence line, sitting perfectly still, as if it had known they would come. When Maria and Jake approached, it stood and barked 3 times. Then it turned toward the overgrown section of property beyond the iron posts and waited, amber eyes fixed on them with that impossible, knowing intelligence.
Last chance to change your mind, Jake said quietly. Maria pushed through the gap in the fence. Let's find her. The honeysuckle was thicker than it looked, its vines twisted around the iron fence posts like something alive and deliberate. Maria pushed through the overgrowth, branches catching on her uniform, releasing the sweet, cloying scent of flowers gone wild. Jake followed close behind, rope coiled over his shoulder, flashlight already in hand despite the morning light filtering through the canopy above. The golden retriever moved with purpose through the abandoned property, weaving between rusted lawn furniture and the skeleton of what once had been a garden shed. It stopped at a section where the ground sloped downward, obscured by decades of neglect. Tall grass, fallen branches, the kind of wild growth that said no one had walked here in years. The dog began digging at a specific spot, its paws moving with frantic urgency. Maria knelt beside it, pulling away layers of dead vegetation and loose soil until her fingers hit metal. Cold, corroded, unmistakable. "Jake, help me!" Together they cleared the debris, revealing a circular drainage grate approximately 3 feet in diameter. The metal was old, pitted with rust, and someone, or something, had forced it partially open. The edges were bent upward, creating a gap wide enough for a child to slip through, wide enough to a dog. Maria pulled out Robert's map, comparing the location to the notation. This is it, maintenance access shaft, designated MA-17 on the blueprint. It should drop about 15 feet to the main junction. The golden retriever stood at the edge of the opening, looked back at them once, then slipped through the gap and disappeared into the darkness below. "Jesus," Jake breathed. "It just went in." Maria secured one end of the rope to a nearby tree, testing the knot twice before dropping the other end into the shaft. She clicked on her flashlight and aimed the beam downward. The light caught glimpses of concrete walls slick with moisture, metal rungs set into the side forming a ladder, and far below, the glint of water. The air rising from the opening smelled of earth and dampness, and something older, like time itself, had settled into the stones. "Radio check," Jake keyed his handset. Static crackled back, weak and distorted. "We'll lose signal the second we go down." "I know." Maria clipped the radio to her belt, anyway, then attached a second flashlight to her shoulder strap. She'd never been claustrophobic before, but staring into that darkness, knowing they were about to descend into a forgotten network of tunnels that officially didn't exist, she felt her throat tighten. Jake must have sensed it. "We can still call this in. Wait for backup. Do this right." Maria thought of Emma Hartley, 5 years old, somewhere in the darkness below if the dog was right. She thought of Margaret's words about Robert's final days, worried about the forgotten drains. She thought of the golden retriever's impossible knowledge, its patient vigil at this exact spot for 4 days.
Emma doesn't have time for us to do this right. Maria grabbed the rope and swung her legs over the edge. The metal rungs were cold beneath her boots, slippery with moisture and algae. "I'm going down. You can wait here if you want." "Like hell." Jake was already moving to follow. "But if we die down there, I'm blaming you in the afterlife." The descent felt longer than 15 feet. Maria's flashlight beam bounced off the walls, catching strange shadows and the occasional glimpse of faded markings from Robert's era. Painted arrows, numbered sections, warnings about water levels. The ladder creaked under her weight. Bolts that had been secured in 1965 now loose and uncertain. Her boots hit solid ground with a splash. The water was ankle deep, cold enough to make her gasp. Jake landed beside her a moment later, both flashlights now sweeping across their surroundings. They stood in a circular junction chamber, approximately 12 feet in diameter. 4 tunnels branched off in different directions, each one a dark mouth leading deeper into the labyrinth. The walls were concrete, stained with mineral deposits and patches of moss that glowed faintly in their lights. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with metronomic precision. The golden retriever sat at the entrance to the northeast tunnel, waiting. When their lights found it, the dog stood and barked once, not urgent this time, but confirmatory, as if acknowledging they'd finally understood the message it had been trying to deliver for 4 days. Then it turned and walked into the darkness, its form quickly swallowed by the shadows.
Maria looked at Jake. He nodded, pulling out chalk to mark their entry point with a large X. They had no map for what lay ahead, no radio contact with the surface, no backup plan if something went wrong. All they had was the dog, the darkness, and the desperate hope that somewhere in this forgotten underworld, Emma Hartley was still alive. They followed the golden retriever into the depths. The northeast tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, forcing Maria and Jake to walk hunched beneath a ceiling that seemed to press closer with each step. Their flashlight beams cut weak paths through darkness so complete it felt solid, revealing concrete walls streaked with rust and calcium deposits that looked like frozen waterfalls. The golden retriever stayed just ahead, a pale shape moving with confidence through the blackness, never hesitating at the intersections that appeared with alarming frequency. Maria pulled out Robert's map at the third junction, trying to orient herself. The paper was already damp, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. According to this, we should be heading east toward the main collector line, but this passage isn't marked on the blueprint. Maybe he never mapped this section, Jake offered, marking another chalk X on the wall, or the tunnel shifted over time. A deep groan echoed through the passage, the sound of concrete settling under decades of pressure and moisture. Dust drifted down from cracks in the ceiling, illuminated like snow in their flashlight beams. Maria's pulse quickened. These tunnels had been forgotten for a reason. They were old, unstable, potentially deadly. The golden retriever barked once, sharp and impatient, then continued forward. They had no choice but to follow. The water grew deeper as they descended, rising from ankle-deep to mid-calf. It was numbingly cold, thick with sediments that made each step uncertain. Maria's boots slipped on algae-covered concrete. Jake caught her arm, steadying her, neither speaking the shared thought that if one of them fell and got injured down here, there would be no quick rescue, no easy evacuation. They passed through a chamber where the ceiling had partially collapsed, rebar hanging like broken bones, chunks of concrete creating an obstacle course through murky water. The golden retriever navigated it effortlessly, leaping from one stable point to another. Maria and Jake moved more carefully, testing each foothold, their breathing loud in the enclosed space. How much farther? Jake's voice was tight with strain. I don't know. The map shows the main line about 200 yards from the access point, but we've gone farther than that. Maria checked her watch. They'd been underground for 30 minutes. It felt like hours. The dripping water created a rhythm that filled the silence between their footsteps. Plip, 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 punctuated by the occasional groan of shifting concrete. Maria found herself counting the drops, her mind reaching for anything to focus on besides the crushing weight of earth above them and the growing fear that they'd made a catastrophic mistake. The tunnel branched again, left to right, both passages disappearing into identical darkness. The golden retriever didn't hesitate, turning right without breaking stride. Maria marked the wall with a large arrow and followed, wondering if the dog truly knew where it was going, or if we were all just wandering deeper into a tomb. A sound stopped them both, faint, distant, but unmistakable, a child's cough echoing through the labyrinth. "Emma!" Jake's shout bounced off the walls, multiplying into a dozen voices calling the same name. Silence answered, then another cough, weaker, from somewhere ahead. The golden retriever broke into a run, splashing through the water with renewed urgency. Maria and Jake followed, exhaustion forgotten, their flashlights swinging wildly as they raced through the tunnel. The passage narrowed, forcing them to turn sideways, then opened into another junction where 3 passages converged. The dog stopped at the entrance to the middle tunnel, its entire body tense. It barked 3 times, the sound reverberating through the chamber, then looked back at them with eyes that held something almost like pleading. Maria aimed her flashlight into the passage. The beam caught a section where the tunnel had partially collapsed, concrete debris blocking most of the opening. But in the gap between fallen slabs, she saw something that made her heart stop. A small pink shoe. Emma's shoe, according to the photos they had studied for 4 days. "Emma!" Maria moved toward the collapse, her voice cracking. "Emma, can you hear me?" Jake was already assessing the collapse, his flashlight revealing the precarious stack of broken concrete.
It's unstable. If we try to move the wrong piece, the whole thing could come down. We don't have a choice. Maria set down her flashlight and began carefully testing the smaller chunks, looking for pieces they could safely remove. Emma, sweetie, my name is Maria. I'm a police officer. We're going to get you out, okay? Can you tell me if you're hurt? My leg hurts, and I'm really cold. The voice was small, frightened, but alive. 4 days in darkness, and she was still alive.
The golden retriever sat beside the collapse, watching them work with patient intensity. It didn't bark again, didn't move, just waited, as if its job was finally almost complete. Maria's hands were bleeding from sharp concrete edges, her uniform soaked through with filthy water, her body screaming with exhaustion. But none of it mattered. They'd found her. Against all odds, against all rational explanations, they'd found Emma Hartley alive in the darkness beneath Meadowbrook. Now they just had to get her out. Maria's hands worked methodically through the debris, testing each piece of concrete before attempting to move it. The slab above them groaned with every shift, rebar creaking like the rigging of a ship in a storm. Jake positioned himself to catch falling pieces, his flashlight clenched between his teeth, both of them acutely aware that one wrong move could bring the entire collapse down on Emma and themselves. "Emma, I need you to stay very still, okay?" Maria kept her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "We're making a space big enough for you to crawl through. Can you do that for me?" "I think so." The voice was stronger now, hopeful. "Is my mom here?" "She's waiting for you at home, sweetie, with your dad. They've been looking for you everywhere." Maria removed another chunk of concrete, creating an opening roughly 2 feet wide. She aimed her flashlight through the gap and finally saw her. Emma Hartley, curled against the far wall of what had once been a maintenance alcove before the tunnel collapsed. The child's birthday dress was filthy and torn, her dark curls matted with dirt and moisture. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made Maria's stomach clench, clearly broken below the knee. But she was alive, conscious, looking back at the light with eyes that held 4 days of terror and desperate, fragile hope. The sight of that small figure in the darkness, so vulnerable and alone, hit Maria with physical force. Her vision blurred. She had to look away for a moment, pressing her palm against the cold concrete wall, fighting the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. They had been minutes from giving up, hours from handing the case to the FBI, days from declaring this a recovery mission instead of a rescue. "Maria," Jake's voice was rough, strained. When she looked at him, his face was pale in the flashlight glow, his hands trembling slightly. He'd seen Emma too, seen how close they'd come to never finding her, to leaving her down here in the dark until it was far too late. The golden retriever squeezed through the gap Maria had created, moving with careful precision to avoid dislodging the precariously balanced concrete above. It settled beside Emma, pressing its body against her, and the child's small hand reached out to rest on the dog's wet fur. "He's been here," Emma said quietly. "He brought me water. He kept barking so I wouldn't fall asleep. I thought I was dreaming of him." Maria's breath caught. The dog had been down here with Emma, not just guiding them to her location, but guarding her, keeping her alive, refusing to let her slip away into hypothermia or unconsciousness. For 4 days while they searched above ground, this animal had been protecting a child it had never met in tunnels that should have been impossible for it to navigate. "Okay, Emma, I'm going to come through now." Maria pulled off her jacket despite the cold, needing freedom of movement. She squeezed through the opening, concrete scraping her shoulders, her radio catching and nearly pulling her back. Jake grabbed it, unclipping it from her belt so she could pass through. The alcove was barely 6 feet across, the ceiling low enough that Maria had to crouch. Water pooled on the floor, and Emma sat in the only dry corner, the dog pressed against her like a living blanket. Up close, Maria could see the extent of the child's injuries, the broken leg, deep scrapes on her arms, the bluish tint of her lips from days of cold and inadequate hydration. But her pulse was steady when Maria checked, her breathing clear despite everything. "You were very brave, Emma. Your grandfather would be proud of you." Maria's forehead creased with confusion. "My grandfather?"
I'll tell you about him later. Right now, we need to get you out of here." Maria carefully examined the broken leg, knowing they'd have to splint it before attempting to move her. "This is going to hurt, sweetie. I'm sorry." Jake passed through the medical supplies, and Maria worked quickly, using materials from the first aid kit to immobilize Emma's leg as best she could. The child whimpered, but didn't cry, biting her lip with determination that broke Maria's heart. 5 years old, and already so much stronger than she should have needed to be. The golden retriever watched the entire process with patient attention, its amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beams. When Maria finally lifted Emma, so light, so small, too fragile to have survived what she survived, the dog stood and moved back through the gap first, leading the way as it had from the beginning. "Jake, we need to move fast but carefully. The whole structure feels unstable." "I've got a point." Jake had already started back toward the junction, his chalk marks visible on the walls like breadcrumbs leading home. "Stay close." Maria followed, Emma cradled against her chest, her arms wrapped around her neck with desperate strength. Behind them, concrete groaned and shifted, the alcove they had just left beginning its final collapse. They'd reached Emma in just time. Minutes later, and she would have been buried beyond any possibility of rescue. The realization left Maria cold in a way the water never had. They walked through the labyrinth in silence, following the golden retriever's steady pace and Jake's marked path, each of them understanding how narrowly they'd all escaped the darkness. The climb back up the access shaft took every ounce of strength Maria had left. Jake went first, Emma secured against his chest in a makeshift sling they had fashioned from rope. Maria followed close behind, ready to catch them if Jake's grip faltered on the slippery rungs. The golden retriever had somehow scaled the ladder ahead of us all, waiting at the top, silhouetted against the morning light that looked impossibly bright after the underground darkness.
Maria's radio crackled to life the moment her head cleared the shaft opening. Captain Williams's voice, frantic with barely controlled anger and relief. "Santos, where the hell have you been? Your patrol car's been sitting at the Hartley property for 2 hours." "We found her, Captain." Maria's voice broke on the words. "We found Emma. She's alive. We need paramedics at the old Hartley property immediately." The chaos that followed felt like a dream. Fire trucks, ambulances, patrol cars converging on the abandoned lot. Paramedics rushing forward to take Emma from Jake's arms, their practiced efficiency a stark contrast to the desperate improvisation of the underground rescue. Jennifer Hartley's scream of relief when she saw her daughter, a sound Maria would hear in her sleep for weeks. Michael's face, pale and disbelieving, as he ran toward the ambulance. Emma was loaded onto a stretcher, oxygen mask secured, IV line already started by the time they lifted her into the vehicle. Jennifer climbed in beside her, refusing to let go of her daughter's hand. Michael followed, pausing only to grip Maria's shoulder with wordless gratitude that said everything words couldn't. The ambulance pulled away, sirens splitting the morning air. Maria turned, wanting to thank the dog, to somehow acknowledge what it had done, what it had made possible. But the space where the golden retriever had been sitting just moments before was empty. She scanned the property, the fence line, the street beyond. Nothing. The dog had simply vanished. "Jake, where did it go?" He looked around, equally confused. "It was right here. I saw it when we came up." Maria pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken in the tunnels for documentation. There, a clear shot of the golden retriever sitting beside Emma in the alcove, its amber eyes catching the flashlight's glow, the identification tag visible on its collar. She zoomed in on the engraving, trying to read the engraving, but the image blurred with moisture on her screen. At Meadowbrook General Hospital 3 hours later, Emma was stable. Her broken legs set and casted, her body temperature normalized, her dehydration being corrected with careful monitoring. The doctors called it a miracle. 4 days in those conditions, and her injuries were relatively minor. A little longer, and the outcome would have been very different. Margaret Hartley arrived in the early afternoon, moving slowly through the hospital corridors with the aid of a cane. Maria met her outside Emma's room, wanting to thank her for the maps that had made the rescue possible. "May I see a photo?" Margaret asked quietly.
of the dog that led you to her." Maria pulled up the image on her phone, the one from the alcove showing the retriever clearly. She handed the phone to Margaret and watched the older woman's face drain of color, her hand gripping the cane so tightly her knuckles went white. "Mrs. Hartley, are you all right?" "That's Winston." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "That's Robert's dog. The same markings, the same collar. We buried him with that collar. I watched them lower him into the ground beside Robert's grave 2 years ago." Maria felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. "That's not possible." "I know what's possible and what isn't, Officer Santos, and I'm telling you, that dog has been dead for 2 years. Margaret looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "But I'm also telling you that Robert loved Emma's father. Even after they stopped speaking, he would have done anything to protect his family. Anything." The implications of what Margaret was suggesting settled over Maria like a weight. She thought of the dog's impossible knowledge of the tunnels, its impossible navigation through passages that weren't on any map, its patient vigil keeping Emma alive until someone finally understood its message. "He saved her," Maria said softly. "Somehow, Robert saved her granddaughter." Margaret nodded slowly. "Love doesn't end with death. Not for men like Robert. Not when there's unfinished business." The next morning, Maria returned to the fence line at dawn, the same time the golden retriever had appeared for 5 consecutive days. The property was quiet now, yellow police tape still marking the area around the access shaft they'd descended. She'd brought a stainless steel bowl filled with fresh water, feeling foolish yet compelled by something she couldn't name. She set the bowl near the spot where the dog had always waited, then knelt in the wet grass. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air, to whatever force, memory, love, or something beyond human understanding had guided them through the darkness. "Thank you for not giving up on her. Thank you for making us see." A breeze moved through the overgrown property, rustling the honey swaggle and carrying the scent of earth and flowers. Maria stayed there for a long moment, watching the water in the bowl ripple in the wind, half expecting to see a golden shape emerge from the morning mist. But the property remained empty. Whatever debt Robert Hartley's spirit needed to repay, whatever unfinished love had called him back, it was settled now. Emma was safe. The family was whole. And somewhere beyond the veil between life and death, a man and his dog could finally rest. Maria stood, touching the fence post once more in silent acknowledgement, then walked back to her patrol car. Behind her, the water bowl sat undisturbed, a small offering to the unseen guardian who had saved them all. Thank you for staying with us till the end of this story. I'm sure you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to get more interesting videos like this.